and you're like, okay, I think I'm a pretty cool girl. I think I'm relatively attractive. I think somebody likes me in this school. But when you aren't getting asked over and over and over again, and the same people get asked, you start to question your beauty. You start to question your desirability. You start to question, your place. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Goode Soil. I am your host, Brittany Alexis, and if this is your first time visiting my channel, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you are a returning viewer, thank you for your support thus far and for sticking with me through all the episodes, ups and downs. I am really excited about today's question, and I'm also a little nervous about it too, because it's something that I think I've thought about internally and sort of navigated internally and have kind of had conversations about it with people, but it's not something I've like really diving, something I haven't really delved into. There we go. Just like on camera or like having a real public conversation about it. So I'm a little nervous about it, but I'm also excited to just flow and see what comes out and see what I'm thinking about this topic. So we'll dive right in. And the question is, Dear Goode Soil, I've heard you mention a few times that you went to a predominantly white school and struggled with fitting in. I too was the minority in my school / where I grew up and struggle with my identity as a person of color to this day. How has your experience impacted your identity as a Black woman, and would you go back to that school if given the chance to do things over? Isn't that a good question? Isn't that just like a deep question that has so many layers and nuances to it? So thank you for this question. This is a really, really, really good question, and it's something that I'm actually like very excited to dive into, because I have over the years, have had conversations with other Black women who have also gone to, or who have also been like the minority in their school or in their community as a child, growing up, not just in like the workplace as an adult, but just like their experience growing up. And it's always an interesting conversation, and it's always different for everyone. So by no means is this a generalization of what it's like being a Black woman in a predominantly white space or being the minority in a predominantly, other race space. This is just my experience and the way I kind of metabolized it growing up and how I'm still figuring it out and figuring out my identity. So I just want to caveat this with that everyone has a different experience. It's just my take. And I've actually seen a lot of takes on like TikTok and on different platforms of women starting to talk about it. Women who grew up in the suburbs, joking about knowing, listening to Lil Wayne and also listening to like Avril Lavigne and like that being a crossover there, and sort of. And I think that really speaks to like the experience of, in my situation, being in predominantly white spaces as a Black woman and a Black girl, was very much playing that sort of double dutch of hopping back and forth between the two sort of cultures and, ideologies and perceptions and how, politics. So I feel like that is such a thing. It's like such a black and white dichotomy, and it's not black and white. But it is black and white in my case. And so I would say it has had a profound impact on my life, like such a profound impact on my identity growing up in spaces where I was not the majority and in fact was the least favorite minority. It really was difficult. And at times it was, as I got older, it became more difficult, because I think because I started going into these spaces when I was very young, like preschool into kindergarten, it wasn't as big of a deal. I think I was just sort of navigating the spaces just as like a child just would navigate any space. I was very observant. I was very, aware of things going on around me. But that was just me. I would have been that way in any space. I think as you get older, you start to realize and start to understand better, how the way you look and the way you show up really does matter to other people. You may have been in a bubble thinking, I'm just here, I just don't happen to look like everyone else. But as you get older, you start getting these microaggressions from your friends. And, I remember one time I was at a good friend's house and she was white and I was, everyone there was white and I was the only black person as per usual. And up until that point, no big deal. Like everyone treated each other the same. We were all just kids being kids. Race wasn't a factor. But I remember this one young woman, we were all trying on those like sticky bras, like where you don't need it's like no wire. It's like flesh colored and like, it's like a weird sticky skin kind of consistency. And it just like sucks onto your boobs. So you can wear it with like strapless dresses and backless dresses and stuff. And I remember all the girls trying it on. And then when it got to me to try it on, the girl like ripped it out of my hand and was like, I don't want her to put it on. And everyone's kind of like, why not? And I think just intuitively and inherently, I was like, oh, okay, I see what's going on here. And so it was a lot of like those little things that start bringing your awareness to, okay, people are noticing something, like people are impacted by me being in this space. And whereas I was kind of oblivious to it in a really beautiful way, now that people are becoming more, ingrained in what they've been taught and more conditioned in what they've been taught. And it's starting to show itself. It's starting to express itself. And so I would say getting into like middle school is when it started, maybe even lower, a little bit of lower school, it started becoming a thing where I was like, oh, okay, I am different from these people. And a lot of people are very accepting of my difference. They don't care because those are my real friends. And a lot of people are very uncomfortable with me being in this space, and their discomfort's starting to make me uncomfortable. And I think it starts like that. It's just that low level of discomfort, that tiny microaggression that just kind of cuts you a little weird. And then you are a little more aware, and you become a little more aware as you start seeing more microaggressions. And again, a lot of the microaggressions they were kind of like, boys would call me homegirl, that's homegirl. And at the time you're like, oh, he calls me homegirl, like he loves me. But then you kind of get older and you're like, that was a little racist. I didn't like that, and a lot of things like that where you're just kind of, you are in this space. You have to assimilate to this space. So when people are telling you that you're different from the space, it kind of it's jarring, because then you're like, wait, what? Like, what? Like, why do I not work? I do the same thing. I'm studying the same things. I'm wearing the same uniform. What is so different? And it starts to chip away at your confidence and starts to chip away at how you view yourself and how safe you feel within your body, especially in those spaces. So I would say that identity issue started pretty early on as those microaggressions kind of started to really infiltrate and become more common. And as you get older, you start realizing the politics that go into growing up in that sort of environment, especially when it came, going into high school, and there were more dances where people had to ask you to dances, like homecoming and prom and things like that. And you're like, okay, I think I'm a pretty cool girl. I think I'm relatively attractive. I think somebody likes me in this school. But when you aren't getting asked over and over and over again, and the same people get asked, you start to question your beauty. You start to question your desirability. You start to question, your place within the male gaze if you were straight, or within the female gaze if you're straight and still minority. So it if you were gay and still in the minority. So it affects desirability and your identity within like femininity and your identity within desirability. And it impacts I was a ballet dancer, so that was a whole other world where I was literally not the only one. And that really was a strange identity thing as well, because I was the only Black person in it and I was a good dancer, it made me stand out in a positive way, because I would go into dance auditions for like summer camps and stuff, and people would be like, looking at me like, oh, who's this? And I just kind of go in a little quiet, because I knew I was coming with something that people weren't expecting. So there was a very good element of surprise that I would bring to these auditions, and I would always get into the places I wanted to go to. And I was like a unicorn in that sense, because I stood out just from being Black, and I also stood out from being good and Black, which was apparently rare. And so they were like, get this girl, get her in, and that was both an interesting dynamic, and I took some pride in that, of knowing what I was coming into the space with, but it's also uncomfortable because dance is so much about body type and so much about the standard of a ballet dancer's body, which has always been, a very svelte, defined, prim, slender, petite, vibe. And while I am, a few of those things, I had a butt and I had some thighs on me and I had some, some muscles and things like that, or at least, I was toned. And so it really also makes you question your desirability in another way, in the sense of, do I meet this particular beauty standard, or am I just this like hulking piece of black rock that is just dragging my body around the stage, and it really does affect that part of you, and that seeps into your real life, because your body, as a young girl, you're like obsessed with your body and how it looks in comparison to other women. And so when you're constantly being told covertly or pretty overtly that you do not meet the standard, it can really mess with you, and you don't have anyone to talk to about it because you're the only one. It's very isolating. Like being the only one and being one of like a few is very isolating, and it's such a singular experience that not a lot of people experience. And so as friendly as you are with your friends, in that, your white friends, for me, as close as I was with my white friends, like soulmate level, like race didn't matter, there was still a level of, I can't talk to you about this because I'm going to have to take care of your emotions in this. I can't just pour out to you and you understand. I have to pick my words correctly. I have to choose the right way of speaking. I have to choose the right tone in order for you to accept what I'm saying without being triggered and defensive. And I think during the Black Lives Matter movement, a lot of us were really exhausted in that same respect, because it was a lot of, this is what I'm going through, but also now I have to educate you about what I'm going through, and I have to send you to find the right books and the right resources to better understand what I'm going through. And now you want to have conversations. And so sometimes it is very isolating in that sense. And so I think all in all, my identity as a Black woman was really and has really been tested, because it's funny, when you are in predominantly white spaces, you don't quite fit in the right way. And when you then move into Black spaces, you don't feel like you fit in the right way because you haven't practiced being around people that look like you. And that sounds sad that you have to practice, but you do kind of have to practice that when you aren't used to that. You do have to sort of try to assimilate into that group. And both groups, I will say Black and white, both groups are all sorts of cultures and races and ethnicities are very hard to assimilate into because they're all so different. But Black and white are so different in a lot of ways as far as what acceptability politics are. Like Black folks' acceptability politics are so different from white folks' acceptability politics. On the Black side, it very much is how down to earth you are, how how much more culturally savvy are you? How culturally sound are you? How culturally, it's like culture, being about the culture, being about Black people, how immersed in this Black experience are you? And that unfortunately goes into, not unfortunately, but I think it's very nuanced and complicated. It's like how you speak, how you carry yourself. It's about kind of bringing yourself down in a sad way. And I know that's going to sound whatever, but it is kind of like that. Like, I feel like Black people are more about being grounded and earthy and down here when it comes to acceptability politics, whether they're right or wrong politics, or whether they're complicated and kind of conditioned in their own sort of Eurocentric thing in and of themselves. It's more about you not being uppity, you not being bougie, you not being, think you're better than everyone else. And again, this is a generalization because there are a lot of people that don't think that way, including myself. And then generalizing the white acceptability politics, it's very much about being up here. You speak very properly, you carry yourself with poise, you aren't wilding out and acting crazy. You're just kind of palatable, and you carry yourself with an air of excellence. Like, that's sort of the generalized version of that. And I've experienced both of those things, and both of those things are actually quite detrimental. Like, I think the point I'm trying to make here is that there are so many other types of ways of being other than those politics, but it's funny how everyone kind of gets locked into those politics, and how much I've experienced like going into a white space and feeling like I need to be more like this, and then going to a black space and feeling like I need to be more like, what's good, sis? Like, how are you? And it doesn't come out right. Neither one is authentic to who I am, because I'm kind of in the middle of both and very messy. And so I think it just screws with your identity, like the politics of it all, the perceived politics, going into spaces with a perception, which needs to be checked. Like there's so many times that I've had to check my perception of Black folks, like going into the Black space, feeling like I need to be acceptable in this different way. When in reality, those people are like, girl, just be you. Like, we don't care. Like, truly, we don't care what you're doing. Just, you're overthinking this. And then going into other spaces where I feel like I have to be the certain way, and truly, they don't care either. So I think it's a lot of understanding what's real and what's reality about the different cultures that are sort of your thing, and other cultures as well. And also just allowing yourself to be you and to sink into who you are, because truly, like, it's so exhausting code switching. It's exhausting, towing the line between what you perceive Blackness to be and what you perceive whiteness to be, and what you have experienced Blackness to be and what you've experienced whiteness to be, and how you fit into those two things, and what stereotypes are completely false, what stereotypes are true. Like it's a lot of thinking about race and thinking about just how you fit into these different groups. And I sometimes wonder, like, if I was in more of a homogenous group of people that look like me, how much more secure I would feel in my Blackness, obviously, and how much more, or how much less I would think about racial identity. I think I would just be a firm Black woman and not feel like I have to constantly over analyze this thing in my life. And so I told you this was complicated. I told you I was a little nervous to talk about this because it's so complex, and I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, but it really has had such a profound impact on my life in so many different ways, and the ways I've talked about, and the ways I, present myself, and the guilt I think associated with like having white friends, or the guilt associated with having perceptions of Black folks that need to be checked, and just feeling like, this pain as well when people kind of call you out saying like, you sound like a white girl, or you're beautiful, or you're pretty for a Black girl. Like there really is a weird thing where you just can't really win, and you're just trying to be as acceptable as possible in whatever room you're in. And I think there's a beauty to that. There's like an adaptability that you kind of develop because of this thing. Like you can go into different types of spaces and sort of adapt to the situation. But there is, when you do that enough times, there's sort of this sadness that comes because you are sort of lost in what is happening on the outside. You're not showing up and allowing people to accept you as you. You're coming in and sort of changing yourself to match and make everyone else feel comfortable so that you feel safe. And it's a really difficult line to toe, especially if you struggle with self-esteem. And this contributes to having that self-esteem issue, because it's like, I'm not enough the way I am. I'm not enough being this person that grew up in this particular environment. I'm not enough, and I'm not enough to this group, and I'm not enough to this group, and I'm not enough to this group, and I'm not enough to this group. And as you get older, like anything, you start to kind of realize like it doesn't matter, not everyone's gonna like me, no matter who I am, no matter how I present myself. Not everyone is gonna be a fan of mine. And so I think you start to kind of shed that sort of identity crisis, but it takes a lot of time, and it's something that is constantly, kind of running in the back of your mind when you go to different spaces. And as a woman of color, it can be really difficult, but it is also, like I said, sometimes, I don't know if I'd go back to that school. I think there's something to say for, like I said, going to a predominantly Black school where people look like me. And I think there is something to that. And I would have loved to experience that more. I think that would have made a better impact on just like my confidence and self-esteem. Potentially, I just don't know. But I think that's probably the case. And, I think we all want to feel accepted and be in a group, whether we're accepted for not accepted for other reasons, but that is such a fundamental thing to just see people that look like you. So I think that would have been really important. I loved the education I did get. I loved the friends I did make, like lifelong friends. I loved the accessibility, of going to that school. But it was difficult, and it had a lot of lasting scars, and a lot of issues with romance and intimacy and rejection and failure and striving for perfection. Like it did create a lot of issues that I'm, still working through and still navigating. So yeah, I would have loved to still go to the same school, and I would have loved that school to have admitted and had been more accessible to people that look like me, so that it was more of a melting pot of people, because I think that's important too, to mix with a lot of different types of people, not just your race or your, social like your socioeconomic level of people. I think it's important to have a vast array of people in one place. So I wish my school just was more diverse. Like I wish it was this. I loved my school. I had a lot of fun there. I made some really great connections, like I said, some really great friends, had some amazing opportunities through dance and study abroad trips, like all sorts of stuff. I would not trade that in for the world. And I would not trade, like the good times. But I would have loved to see more people that look like me. I would have loved to see more people that look like a lot of different types of people. And I think that just would have challenged all of us in a really beautiful way and in a really important way. So that is what I would want to have happen, more so than me going to an entirely different school, and just being around people that look like me. I would have loved that, but I think there's something to say about it being a melting pot as well. So yeah, a lot of identity stuff, a lot of stuff that I'm still working through. Like even as a writer, there's just so many, I'm like, how do I even crack this nut and talk about this effectively? Because like even as a writer, I've thought about like, how do I write and tell Black stories? And what is a Black story? Like even all that, like how do I tell my experience without it being this sort of, I have to tell Black stories. I have to like put the Black experience up there when the Black experience is so nuanced. It's like my Black experience is different from my best friend's Black experience is different from this person's Black experience, which is different. It's so different. And I think even in Hollywood, it's been weird navigating that identity as well, because it's like, as a Black woman, the stories I tell, that's sort of just like what makes it a Black story is because the author is Black. And like, so, and it doesn't even, it's just a story. Like, it's so weird. It's like, it's very interesting and something I've had to navigate. And a lot of, I think, writers of color have to navigate in this world is like, how do I have access to telling any story I want? Like a lot of white writers and other writers and male writers, how do I have as much access to write stories about all sorts of people as long as I do my due diligence and I make sure I'm telling an accurate story and I make sure I'm telling an emotionally intelligent story and like an ethnically or culturally intelligent story, an accurate story? How do I have access to that range of creative freedom and not feel like I have to be put in a box that Hollywood's usually putting us in? How do I market myself as a Black woman writer who has access to tell all sorts of stories? And I think the answer to that is just doing it and finding the right people to collaborate with and work with. But it's definitely been something that I think that past sort of identity issue has seeped into of figuring out who I am as a Black woman and as a Black writer. And like what stories I tell and what responsibility I have as a storyteller. And it's just, it really does seep into so many different areas of life. And it's impacted quite a bit. And it's just funny. Yeah, it's just funny. Like just identity is so funny, and the ways that we feel like we have to be acceptable to everyone based on just some weird data, like some just like historically conditioned data that's just like rooted in slavery and rooted in, oppression and colonialism. And then what things actually like make up a Black person, make up a Black woman, like what are these things? And the stakes seem so high for it too. it's so interesting to me too about like just yeah, race is so interesting, of course, to everyone. So anyway, it's really been something that has impacted me. I've said that a million times, but I would love to hear from you guys, like in the comments. How has being minority, how has being a woman of color, how has being a Black woman in a space where you are other, how has that impacted your identity? How has it, how have you sort of navigated it, overcome it? I think it's just like anything, you just grow through it and you start caring less and less what people think, and you start caring more and more about how you feel and what you enjoy and what you love, and understanding that your spirit and your soul truly are just, don't really care about race and don't really care about color. And that's not to erase like culture, and that's not to erase like these really beautiful traditions that Black folks have, Africans have, like it's not, and where you come from, it's not even to erase that, but it's just, again, getting back to the basics of who you are as a person and incorporating things in your life that you genuinely want to incorporate and love and want to be more connected to, and also pushing yourself to do that, not being complacent either. Like if there are things, like there's so many things that I was so principled about or so worried about within my culture, but it's like, no, I just wasn't educated about it because I grew up in a white space that wasn't educating me about it. Like there are some things you do have to check, and different biases you do have to check, and different conditioning you do have to check that are rooted in like European standards and just things that you believe that really aren't in your best interests. So there is a due diligence that needs to happen. Like, are you not culturally active because you're afraid of it, or is it because you just don't care? Whatever the reason, sometimes it's worth reflecting on that and getting deeper into that and understanding how you may need to do some deconditioning. Especially me, like there's so many things I had to decondition myself about because I was so integrated into that society and in that space that when I did get kind of older, I had to be like, I don't think that thought process is like me. Like, I think I need to check that. I think I need to check some of these biases I have, because I don't know, that doesn't feel right. So I think that's also important. And it's also important to just learn more about your heritage, learn more about your culture, learn more about your history, learn more about where you come from, where your people come from, where your family comes from. But I think there's a level of pressure that we sometimes feel to do that. And I am all about not experiencing a ton of pressure, especially peer pressure. And just letting yourself sort of uncover and discover who you are and who you want to be and how you want to move through the world, and, what it feels best for you. And understanding that it's normal to have that sort of identity issue and crisis when you are in spaces that are confusing and that are sending out messages to you that aren't right, or mixed messages, or messages that makes you feel other and makes you feel less than and makes you feel like you have to like contort yourself to blend in and to fit in. That's really hard to do. And I truly think people who have to do that, myself included, are very strong and very patient and very resilient and very just like, I don't know, like that is a hard job to do. And I commend anyone who had to like survive through that, because that is hard. And I do consider it like a surviving. And we Black people have been doing that for forever. We've been surviving for forever. But other people of color, other communities, like having to do that, it's difficult, it's draining, it's tiring, it's confusing, it's complex, it's isolating, it's just not fun. And yeah, so I've exhausted this, and I feel like I don't know. I feel like who knows, but it's an interesting topic. I'm curious watching this back if I'm going to be like, oh, Brittany, why did you say that? But we're here to be honest and talk about my experience. And I might do a part 2. I might think about this a bit more and wish I'd said something or wish I hadn't said something, but, yeah. So I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Thank you for watching another episode. Thank you for your questions. You can submit a question if you have one in the, I put a link in the description box below. Send me your questions. I want to answer them. I want to, encourage you the best way I can and dive into some of these topics that are a little more difficult to talk about and are just complex and nuanced. So thank you again for watching Goode Soil. You are Goode Soil. I love you. Take care of yourself. Take care of each other and have a wonderful weekend. Okay, bye. Thank you for watching another episode of Goode Soil. If you liked this video, be sure to share it with friends and family because we could all use a little reminding that we are Goode Soil. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel and follow us on Instagram and TikTok. Okay, thanks for watching. Bye.